As animal activists, we do not have to fear presenting the bare facts. We don't have to try to sensationalize or exaggerate. The truth is bad enough.
So happy to have Emily Moran Barwick. She is an animal liberation activist, educator, writer, artist, international speaker. And after completing her Master of Fine Arts, Emily founded Bite Sized Vegan. Emily, it's all you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such an honor to be a part of this conference. Today, I wanted to talk about the importance of language in activism, specifically covering some of the potential pitfalls, distractions, diversions, and counterproductive traps that we can fall into as activists. The most dangerous of these are often wrapped in the guise of making veganism more approachable. In our efforts to increase the accessibility of veganism, we may inadvertently compromise our convictions and soften our ethics, offering gradations of change or incremental reduction in animal product consumption or humane alternatives. Now, this is often born from the belief that we must take an either firm, even militant and polarizing, or a soft conciliatory approach to our outreach. But this is a false dichotomy. The real challenge is walking the line of staying firm in our convictions and uncompromising in our message while still helping people to lower their guard enough to listen, hear, and make the connection. So within the vegan movement, a major approach that activists take is the social normalization of veganism. What I mean by this is making a vegan lifestyle accessible, affordable, easy, even mainstream. And this is a very logical tactic, especially when considering that one of the strongest deterrents to going vegan is social ostracism and rejection from friends and family. And I am the last person to decry increasing the accessibility of veganism. It is something about which I am intensely passionate and is one of the foundational aspects of Bite Size Vegan. However, in attempting to bridge the gap and meet the general public where they're at, there exists the risk of reducing the ethical imperative of veganism to a socially acceptable lifestyle choice. This is why it's so vital that we be mindful of our language choices as activists, lest we end up advocating the very things we're fighting against. So, a very common approach activists take to provide an entry point to veganism is encouraging people to reduce their intake of animal products, like meat-free Mondays. Such an incremental option is obviously more palatable to non-vegans. It allows them to make a minor change while still providing the emotional benefit of doing something good. But it's equally alluring for us activists. Perhaps we're afraid of coming across as extreme and want to provide a less intimidating suggestion. Perhaps we ourselves are intimidated to ask for something so big as going fully vegan. Perhaps we believe that any change is better than no change at all. And while it's understandable for such fears and beliefs to arise, we must take a step back and recognize their implications. Believing that going fully vegan is too much to ask simply reinforces that very misconception. Offering gradations of change, in essence, endorses the idea that there are acceptable levels of cruelty. When I spoke in Dublin, I met Sandra Higgins, the founder of Eden Farmed Animal Sanctuary in Ireland, who is also a psychologist. I remember her making the rather apt analogy, saying that something along the lines that if she had a patient who was beating his wife and children, she would never advise him to try and reduce the frequency of his violence or stop beating his wife and children on Fridays. The message has to be that violence is always unacceptable and has to be eradicated. When we take this approach of reductionism, we're not only doing a disservice to the animals, but also to the non-vegans. We're deciding for them that they can't handle the full truth. We're deciding for them that they can't or won't make the decision to go vegan. This is similar in a way to how the American Heart Association approached its official dietary recommendations, the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. While decades of research have demonstrated that consuming animal products is highly significantly associated with elevated blood pressure, the DASH diet still includes dairy and meat. In his book, How Not to Die, Dr. Michael Greger explains why this is the case, stating, "The reason that the DASH diet was modeled explicitly after vegetarian diets but was not meat-free itself might surprise you. The primary design goal of the DASH diet was to explicitly create eating patterns that would have the blood pressure lowering benefits of a vegetarian diet, yet contain enough animal products to make them palatable to non-vegetarians." The doctor who chaired the DASH diet committee had even shown that the more dairy vegetarians consumed, the higher their blood pressure appeared to rise. But he figured there was no point in calling for a diet he believed few would follow. This is a recurring theme in official dietary recommendations. Instead of simply telling you what the science shows and then letting you make up your own mind, experts patronize the population by advocating what they think is practical rather than ideal. By making the decision for you, they undermine those willing to make even greater changes for optimal health. So in the same way, when we preemptively offer non-vegans gradations of change rather than the entirety of the truth, we are depriving them of the opportunity, and I believe the right, to have all of the facts and make a decision for themselves. The same holds true for what I believe to be the most insidious pitfall for activists and non-vegans alike: humane labels and animal welfare regulations. Humane language and concepts have easily gained a stronghold because they appeal to all sides. For the vegan, afraid of coming across as militant, they provide an approachable suggestion to offer. For activists fighting for animal liberation, they give the possibility of better conditions, progress towards the ultimate goal. And certainly for the non-vegan, who now has a way to keep doing what they want to do, but feel good about it. I've been told it can sound odd coming from an animal rights activist, but I find that humane labels and animal welfare regulations are often detrimental to animals. In fact, the entire concept of animal welfare is antithetical to animal rights. Welfare regulations are designed to spare animals any unnecessary suffering. The unspoken implication being that some suffering is necessary when it benefits humans. Still, even if animal liberation is the ultimate goal, isn't there value in improving the conditions for those currently in our systems of exploitation? While this thought process is understandable, we must again take an honest look at what welfare regulations actually mean for the beings they are designed to protect. A striking example of the true impotence of welfare regulations is the battery cage ban within the European Union. So in 1999, the Council of the European Union set a directive that banned all barren battery cages by 2012. And while the media coverage at the time focused on the end of battery cages in the EU, what the directive actually did was replace barren battery cages with enriched battery cages, meaning furnished. So yes, hens would now be provided more space and given furnishings like perches and laying nests, certainly an improvement over barren cages. However, while the media reports extolled that hens would now be afforded 750 square centimeters, they neglected to clarify that, due to the new furnishings, only 600 square centimeters would be useful. Now, I know it's a lot of numbers, and it's hard to kind of visualize what that means. So in the end, this revolutionary step forward for the rights of laying hens granted them less than a single playing card of additional space. Even more maddening, in 2012, over 12 years after the directive, 13 member states had still failed to comply with the ban. But as the media celebrated the victory for animal welfare, the public ate even more eggs, reassured by the higher standards. And the individuals that this entire charade was supposed to be for remained just as exploited. The execution of the barren battery cage is far from a single failing. In 2001, the EU outlawed gestation crates. If you're unfamiliar, these are single sow enclosures constructed of metal bars and hard flooring, in which mother pigs are confined during their pregnancies. As always, the ban came with ample fine print exceptions and over a decade for implementation. 12 years later, 9 member states had still failed to comply with the ban. The most amazing thing about all of this is that several of the member states that failed to implement the battery cage and or the gestation crate bans are rated amongst the best countries in the world for animal welfare. So as alluring as the idea of better conditions for animals may be, animal welfare legislation is based upon the presumption that we have a right to use non-human animals for our own purposes. Rather than condemn the breeding, enslavement, mutilation, and slaughter of sentient beings, welfare legislation simply codifies precisely how we may breed, enslave, mutilate, and slaughter them. In 2007, the European Union historically declared non-human animals legally sentient, deserving freedom from hunger, thirst, discomfort, pain, injury, disease, fear, distress, and mental suffering. Having recognized their capacity to feel the same emotions and sensations as we do, the EU proceeded to draft landmark legislation for their humane treatment, and the resulting council regulation was and is viewed as a victory for animals. Now, for those of us in countries without regulations, it's natural to think that the systematic abuse of farmed animals results, at least in large part, from a total lack of oversight. In the United States, for example, there are no federal laws governing the treatment of animals in our food industry. We do have the Animal Welfare Act of 1966, but like so many welfare acts around the world, it excludes animals raised for food, as do the majority of state anti-cruelty regulations. Many U.S. activists and organizations stress the need for regulations to end such atrocities as the routine mutilations without anesthetic, the maceration, meaning the grinding up of male chicks in the egg industry, and the blunt force euthanasia of piglets, often pointing to the European Union as a shining example. However, within the EU legislation and supplemental documents, those very same atrocities are not decried, but codified. So instead of male baby chicks being ground up alive because there are no regulations to stop it, they are ground up alive because regulations declare it as the preferred method for male chick disposal. There are even detailed specifications for blade speed and sharpness to avoid gumming up the works of the machine. We'd like to think that humane regulations are driven by what's best for the animals. But the animal products industries are, after all, industries. They are profit-driven. A preliminary report for the European Union's legislation found that while gassing the estimated 335 million day-old male chicks killed in the EU annually would cost 1.7 million euros, the cost of using, quote, rotating or whirling knives which are mincing the chicks in a split second can be considered not to be substantial. So the decision had nothing to do with what was most humane. It was simply a matter of what was cheapest. The maceration of baby chicks has been exposed time and again in undercover footage, which brings me to another pitfall that I wanted to address: the presentation of undercover exposés. While I do believe that undercover footage is of vital importance in the fight for animal liberation, we must be mindful of the framing and presentation. When it comes to undercover exposés, it's often what's not said that's most damaging. Every time undercover footage has captured workers from one country or another tossing live baby chicks into a grinder, news outlets dramatically recount the unbelievable cruelty. And every time, the public is appalled, outraged, and disgusted. And every time, they assume that it's an isolated incident of extreme cruelty, and they continue to eat eggs, confident that they're not supporting such brutality. The most important message of all is left unsaid: that this is not a barbaric practice isolated to corrupt, abusive facilities or industrialized farms. that grinding up live babies is a welfare regulation, a worldwide standard practice. The fact that the lines between overt abuse and standard industry practice are so indistinguishable highlights the absurdity of animal welfarism and humane concepts. In my essay, The Harm of Humane, from the book Vegan Voices, I opened with a specific example of this from my home state in Iowa. In September 2008, an undercover video documenting routine abuse at an Iowa pig breeding facility made international news. The footage and investigators' notes captured workers kicking and beating pregnant pigs with metal objects, sexually violating them with rods, and they were also shown cutting off the tails and tearing out the testicles of piglets without anesthetic, and slamming sick or deformed piglets against the ground, leaving them to die slowly, piled on top of one another in giant bins. Now, while these acts of cruelty were exposed by vegan activists, the egregiousness of the abuse rightfully sparked outrage from meat-eating consumers. And the food company supplied by the farm, Hormel, received over 10,000 calls in 2 days. In the Wire report that was issued by the Associated Press, they quoted a Hormel spokesperson who called the abuses completely unacceptable. And they also quoted the farmer who emphasized, "We condemn these types of acts," and called them completely intolerable, reprehensible, vowing to investigate and initiate corrective action immediately. So anyone reading this report would be left with the impression that this was an isolated incident of overt cruelty, or, at the very worst, a regular occurrence isolated to large factory farms. But amidst the cataloged horrors in this article, the troubling implication of a single sentence was easily overlooked. So, of course, that's what I focused on. Following the description of the workers' treatment of piglets, the report stated, quote, "Temple Grandin, a leading animal welfare expert who serves as a consultant to the livestock industry, said that while those are standard industry practices, the treatment of the sows on the video are far from it. This is atrocious animal abuse," Grandin said. So to be clear, the treatment of the mother pigs was what Grandin deemed atrocious animal abuse. The acts that she waved away as standard industry practice were the unanesthetized mutilation of newborn piglets and the brutal and ineffective slamming of defective piglets against the concrete floor. And she was not wrong. Not only are these practices legal, they are government-sanctioned methods within, but not limited to, the United States, Canada, and the European Union. Within my essay, I implore the reader to ask themselves, were you to have watched that video, heard the piercing screams of the mother pigs and their babies, would you have spotted the difference between the atrocious animal abuse and the standard industry practices? When we fail to explain and emphasize that the horrors depicted in these videos are not only legal, but actually government-sanctioned, humane legislation dictated practices, we leave the public with the impression that this was the result of a few malicious sociopathic workers or poorly regulated facilities, just a few bad apples. Far from considering veganism, the public is left thinking that, well, luckily the perpetrators were exposed and will surely be punished. Thank goodness the eggs, meat, or dairy that we eat isn't contributing to this kind of abusive behavior. Invariably, when horrific acts are exposed to the public, there is a call for stronger regulations and higher welfare standards. As activists, we can become caught in this self-perpetuating cycle, believing that we're fighting for progress when we're simply running in place. An example of this cycle is the rise of cage-free eggs. I recently published an article, video, and e-course on cage-free eggs, which you can find at bitesizevegan.org/cagefree. As always happens when I dive into researching a topic, even one I've previously covered, I find so much new information. I've stated in several videos and speeches that cage-free hens have been shown to have twice the mortality rate of battery-caged hens. This is a seemingly damning indictment to the idea that such humane labels as cage-free are improvements for animals. When I began researching this statistic, I found that it's far more complicated. After coming across a meta-analysis that seemed to indicate mortality rates have been on the decline worldwide in cage-free systems, such that the difference between caged and non-caged hens is nearly non-existent, I worried that this worked against the point I'd been trying to make in the past. But something that I find so incredibly important in my activism is never shying away from new information. Even if it seems like it may go against what I'm aiming to say, it's so important to evaluate and present what's true. And invariably, once I go deeper into the research, I find that what may initially seem to be a contradiction, or even something in support of an agricultural practice, the underlying reality of anything within the animal products industry cannot help but be problematic. So I'd like to take you through my own journey with researching the question of hen mortality rates in different housing systems, at least in brief. Laying hens were originally moved into battery cages for a number of reasons, including profit and management-oriented benefits such as reduced labor requirements, greater efficiency of space, meaning more birds could be housed in the same area, and lower feed requirements. However, there were also perceived benefits to the hens themselves, including a reduction in disease transference, injurious pecking, and cannibalism. As the demand rose for cage-free eggs, multiple studies found that the mortality rate in non-cage systems was higher than in battery cage systems due to those very issues, meaning there was an increase in injurious pecking, cannibalism, and disease transference. One of the more comprehensive studies that I quoted in the past found that cage-free hens had 2.5 times higher mortality rate than battery caged hens. But to be clear, that this finding was not isolated to that study or even to one country. So it would seem that cage-free eggs actually result in more deaths than battery cages. However, in more recent years, researchers have pointed out that the reason for higher mortality rates may not have anything to do with the housing system per se. Instead, rates appear more reliably tied to the genetic strain of hens within the facilities, the experience level of managing staff, and whether flocks are debeaked. Researchers argued that as producers have become more familiar with managing non-cage systems and have started using more appropriate breeds, the mortality rates have been on the decline, and they believe that this decline will continue. Now, at first glance, I was worried that I'd been conveying faulty data, that perhaps the decline in mortality rates in non-cage systems was a promising trend in support of such humane labels as cage-free. But the more I read, the more I found that, rather than pointing to reasons for hope, the causes of mortality decline actually highlighted the reality that within the animal products industries, the solutions are the problems. What I mean by this is that every time our breeding, confinement, mutilation, and slaughter of non-human animals invariably cause ethical, environmental, and health problems, we strive to solve them with different variations of breeding, confinement, mutilation, and slaughter. We continue this cycle over and over again, addressing problems of our own creation with solutions that will eventually become our next problem, rather than stepping back and questioning our use of animals in the first place. When hens injure and kill one another due to their breeding and living conditions, both of which we have imposed upon them, the solution is to cut off their beaks and further alter their breeding. This has happened before in the reverse. In Denmark, laying hens were not moved into cages until 1980. At the time, the dominant breed of hens was adapted specifically for non-cage systems. When moved into cages, their mortality rate increased 5 times over. The same trend observed when moving hens who were bred for battery cages into non-cage environments. The problem isn't really the housing, the label, the stocking density, or whatever it is that we want to point to. The problem is us and the way in which we relate to these beings. I also want to note that in all of the research I came across about mortality rates not being down to the housing system, the importance of debeaking hens to reduce injurious cannibalistic behavior was strongly emphasized. Even if using the appropriate breed of hen and having more experienced management, whether a flock was debeaked or not was often the deciding factor in mortality rates. Of course, debeaking is a painful mutilation in which a portion of a bird's sensitive beak is cut or burned off. I found a statement from Ian J.H. Duncan, Professor Emeritus and Emeritus Chair of Animal Welfare at the University of Guelph, Canada, that illustrates this predicament. He said, quote, "If producers do not trim beaks, then feather pecking and cannibalism may cause enormous suffering. If they do trim beaks by conventional methods, the birds will suffer from acute and chronic pain. Chopping off parts of young animals in order to prevent future welfare problems is a very crude solution." And he proposed instead that likely the long-term solution to this problem will be a genetic one. And while certainly less objectionable than debeaking on a visceral level, genetic manipulation of sentient beings to serve our purposes is not only extremely ethically problematic, but, once again, what got us into this position in the first place. When we as activists push for welfare reform, higher standards, better regulations, we are participating in this cycle. We are participating in a system built upon a faulty and unethical premise that animals are ours to use, that there is a right, an acceptable way to use them, that the solution to their suffering is to further control and manipulate their very beings. So, after covering examples of what not to say in our activism, I wanted to touch on some approaches of what to say and how to say it, as well as ways to remove common barriers that arise when speaking with non-vegans. As activists, we must stay focused on the universal truth underlying any use of sentient beings. That even if we imagine an idealized small farm where animals are given ample space outdoors, their every need cared for, there will still come a time when their life is cut short. Their entire existence is still based upon an owner-product framework. Their value is not viewed as inherent, but rather calculated down to the dollar. One way of effectively cutting to this core truth for non-vegans is to place it within a familiar emotional framework. We may have them envision this idealized small farm, but imagine, in place of the happy farmed animals, a beloved family pet. Would it be acceptable to end their pet's life? What if it was guaranteed that they wouldn't feel a thing, that it would be quick and humane? Instantly, the unacceptability of this is clear at a visceral level. And from that connection, we can explore with them what is the difference between a pet and a sentient being in the food industry. Do they not also feel pain and fear? We can even give a specific example. When a mother cow in a dairy industry cries out for her calf, taken from her, so she will produce more milk for humans, is that not a mother grieving? When she is sexually violated yet again to induce yet another pregnancy and give birth to yet another child who will yet again be taken from her, how can that not take an emotional and physical toll? There's a reason dairy cows' bodies generally give out at age 4 to 5, despite having a natural lifespan of 20 years or more. Applying such emotionality to non-human animals is often criticized as anthropomorphic, an objection that actually illustrates the contradiction of humane concepts. Humane regulations are an inherent admission of an animal's ability to suffer and feel pain. How can we claim that our animals are healthy and happy and then deny that they possess these capacities when asked to see from their perspective? We cannot have it both ways. This is how profoundly illogical our thinking is when it comes to animals. Knowing better, but doing wrong anyways, is worse than having no knowledge. Yet we have the audacity to hold the legislative recognition of non-human sentience on high as a giant step forward for the rights of animals, as if systematically exploiting individuals with fully admitted knowledge and comprehension of their capacity to suffer is something to commend. highlighting this faulty logic and focusing on the fundamental truth we've all known since childhood, that it's not okay to hurt others. Cuts through all of the convoluted justifications and diversions, allowing people to reconnect with their own values. As I stated at the opening of this speech, activists often fall into the trap of offering gradations of change or humane alternatives when seeking a more approachable entry point to offer non-vegans. I've long believed that one of the main reasons people don't go vegan is the immense pain and guilt of accepting our part in horrific atrocities. Confronting the true impact of our choices is incredibly daunting. So instead, we shut down, attack, or throw out any number of standard objections that you've no doubt heard countless times. Lions, desert islands, what about protein? It's human nature to raise our guards when we're on the defensive. We close off and we shut down. And it would seem logical as activists to avoid upsetting our audience in order to keep their receptivity open. However, this is a perfect illustrative example of walking the line. It's not about making sure that we don't upset anyone. If they're grasping the truth, they should be upset. It's making sure that the pushback to the truth we revealed are aimed at their rightful sources, leading to constructive, well-deserved outrage. When we present them with solid factual information about the industries in an educational setting, we supply a buffer of sorts, providing a target for their outrage other than themselves, thus sidestepping shutdown and channeling their outrage to action. I do want to note that this is not an attempt to excuse participation in exploitation. When I speak to a non-vegan audience, I always tell them that they deserve to know the truth about what they're putting in their body, about what they're feeding to their children. They deserve to know how what they eat impacts their planet, and they certainly deserve to know what they are paying others to do to animals in their name. Approaching vegan outreach from this perspective helps diffuse the charge of defensiveness and resistance. There's no need to pander, sugarcoat, or offer more palatable options. I simply present them with factual evidence, allowing them to evaluate whether they want to continue supporting actions out of line with their values. Another barrier I strive to eliminate in my activism is the issue of trust. There are many reasons non-vegans may dismiss the vegan message, not the least of which is the messenger. This is why when I speak with non-vegans, I am sure to present information put forth by their own agricultural industries and governmental bodies. This not only helps diffuse the potential defensive charge of some random vegan telling them how bad things are, but it also allows me to show that even the proposed ideal, which is of course never met, is absolutely horrifying. This is of particularly importance when speaking to audiences in other countries and cross-culturally. When I spoke in Dublin, Ireland, I dove deep into the humane legislation for both Ireland and the European Union. Now, Ireland is a powerful case study. It's essentially the humane concept embodied in country form. Cows graze outside in picturesque fields, lending support to the common refrain that it's not like that here. And by all appearances and accounts, it's not. Even after some digging, I only found a single undercover video of abuse. However, I didn't want to focus on abuse. I wanted to focus on the ideal standards. I told the audience that the facts I present today are not of my creation. I've sourced them from primarily Irish governmental and industry documents and the European Union. And I stated that they didn't even have to believe me, because I'd be providing a link to a full transcript of the talk with citations for every fact and a bibliography and additional resources. This not only provides opportunities for further learning, but also removes the significant potential barrier of requiring someone to trust in me personally on issues about which they're already guarded. As animal activists, we do not have to fear presenting the bare facts. We don't have to try to sensationalize or exaggerate. The truth is bad enough. The ideal, the very best we have to offer, is bad enough. And more importantly, we do not need to and should not compromise the integrity of our ethics in an effort to make veganism more approachable. When we do so, we're supporting the very things we are fighting against. We do not have to fear sharing the truth with others. It's not only vital for the sentient beings we are defending, but it's also the most respectful approach for the non-vegan with whom we're speaking, because they deserve to know, and they deserve to make a choice with all the facts at their disposal. I hope that this has been a helpful exploration of the importance of language in activism. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you enjoyed hearing my speech from the Humane Hoax Online Conference. To stay in the loop about new bite-sized vegan content and updates, remember to subscribe to the newsletter or follow the Telegram channel for the most reliable notifications. Now go live vegan, and I'll see you soon.